having some microphone issues earlier today, so I'm just going to stay put right here today. Well, following TCU's Rose Bowl victory, I'm starting to feel like I've been a little hard on folks from Wisconsin. First of all, my Horned Frogs beat those Badgers right back to the Midwest. And now I've just about decided I think I'm going to go for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Super Bowl, maybe against my better judgment, but for two reasons. One, Pastor there's a clap there. Pastor Phil is going for the Green Bay Packers, and sometimes it's fun to go against him. Oh, there he is. The other reason is, what's my other reason? It's call and response sermon time. The other reason is the Steelers are hosting in Fort Worth, and they're practicing at Texas Christian University. That's clearly the better choice between the two towns in the Metroplex. So I feel like I need to throw people from Wisconsin a bone. I mean, Jesus did. I remember in that great comedy, The Life of Brian, where Jesus is speaking on top of the hill, and the two guys at the bottom can't quite overhear what Jesus is saying, and they say, "What did he say?" The other one turned to him and said, "I think he said, 'Blessed are the cheese makers.'" So blessed are those cheese makers. I feel a little better. A little better. But this Sermon on the Mount, this Beatitudes that Jesus is speaking, what they mean is this is what the kingdom is about. Throughout the verses in Matthew, Jesus is traveling the countryside, and people are attracted to him. This message that the kingdom is drawing near, and they're coming close, those who are hurting, who are in pain, who have disease, who are demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics. They're coming for curing. And all of these crowds are starting to follow Jesus. At the very beginning of our reading, it says, when Jesus saw these crowds, he went up on the mountain and sat down. And I think when Jesus is speaking, he cannot be just speaking to the disciples. He must be speaking to this crowd of people who are gathered there around him, speaking to this whole community of God, saying this is what the kingdom is about. And I think his message, I'm sure, challenged the disciples and their picture of God. They've just decided, it couldn't have been 10 verses before, where they say they're going to leave everything. They're going to follow this Jesus. They're going to be fishers for people. And then suddenly Jesus sits them down and says, okay guys, here are the people who are going to be on your team. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for wholeness. I'm sure that was not what they were expecting to hear at that moment. But it challenges, I think, our picture of God as well. What God is about, because we don't look at the picture or an image of poor, mourning, grieving, hungry, or thirsty and say, that's the picture of blessing. That challenges our picture of the way things are. But Christ is saying, this is what the kingdom is about. That the transformation of the kingdom has already begun. This kingdom drawing near. And we find ourselves right there in that crowd, huddled close to Jesus, because sometimes we're the ones who are hurting or grieving in our life. Sometimes we are the ones longing for some sense of power, trying to right what's wrong in this world. Sometimes we're like the second half of what Jesus says, where we try to live into that kingdom, whether we try to be merciful, or maybe we show a passion for God, or try to be a peacemaker. And even in that moment, ironically, even those, like Micah says, that do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly, even those end up grieving from time to time. Because we follow in the footsteps of Christ, one who tried to bring justice to the world, yet his life ended in the most unjust way. And so we, as a community, are gathered there, at the bottom of that mountain, listening to Jesus' words, longing to be blessed, longing for the promise of this kingdom. We find ourselves there. And when we step out to do the work of the kingdom, guess what? We find out it's too big. Because no one person can follow all of these teaching that Jesus lays out. In fact, Jesus' teaching teaches us to depend solely on God and also to depend on one another, to depend on the community around Christ, because in the community comes the kingdom blessing. Christ's words, they aren't directed at just one person, nor are they just directed at 12 disciples, but they're directed at that entire community that's gathered around Christ at that place. The words are really a description of the life of people that are gathered around Christ and the cross. This cross, which is foolishness to some, which makes no sense to those who are gathered close, is the power of God. This cross, which is what we as a community are gathered around. This cross is this symbol of what it looks like when God gets involved in the world, when God enters into pain and suffering to embrace all of humanity with the promise of the kingdom. And it happens in this community. Beatitudes, these words of Christ, describe the work of the kingdom that happened in Jesus' time, the work of the kingdom that is now, and the kingdom that will be tomorrow and the next day. And that's what we're about here at Calvary Lutheran Church. Being God's heart with human hands, living into that kingdom promise. That's the reason we do the things that we do, that we have the ministries that we have here. That's the reason worship is central to what we're about. It's the reason we have wonderful musicians and orchestras and bells and choirs that make music for the kingdom. It's the reason we have Stephen ministers who are available to walk beside anyone who needs an extra friend or just a listening ear. It's the reason that we do service so well here. It's the reason we feed the hungry, whether it be here on Wednesday night, whether it be responding to the need food pantry shelves, which you see in the hallways, overflowing baskets, whether we help volunteer with Presbyterian night shelter or room at the inn. It's the reason we do these things. It's the reason we have wonderfully faithful Sunday school teachers who train up children to be workers in the kingdom. Did you know that our youngest Sunday school children make cards for veterans? Or that kids club on Wednesday night made 50 or 60 notes of blessing to slip into the lunch boxes, the lunch bags of our room at the inn guests that we have here from week to week? Did you know that next week we're having a peer ministry leadership training for high schoolers? 50 high schoolers from our area are going to be trained on how to be better leaders in their schools and in their homes. And yesterday we had a Parish Lay Academy. 13 adults completed a 2-year program of study. 3 of them connected here. One of them, Don, is now on the pulpit supply for our mission territory. This is why we train leaders to be workers in the kingdom, to do mission of God in the world. Like the mission trip we did last year, to completely build a fellowship hall and put on a full-blown day camp, all for the community of Alvarado. And that's just the stuff I can think of in the last 9 months that I've been here. This is what we're about. Sharing God's love with the kingdom. Outside these walls. In our communities. This is what we're about. Being God's heart. With our human hands. May God bless us in our continued ministry together. Amen.